while we were developing the scripts, I was thinking already about stagecraft and already thinking, you know, does this scene make sense for the technology? Is it the best use of it? And we could sort of shape what we were actually writing to use the strengths of the volume.
So what do you hope Star Wars fans take away from seeing this Obi-Wan series?
I think the biggest thing we were really trying to do is really have more time and get deeper into the character of Obi-Wan. And that was something that the limited format, you know, really allowed us to do, was allow us to take more time with him. So I really hope that for everyone that these feel like the characters, you know, obviously at a different point in their lives. That was sort of the responsibility of it, is that we're straight into canon here with the legacy characters.
Revenge does wonders for the will to live, don't you think?
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
I'm not typically one to bring up my track record when it comes to Disney Star Wars, but fuck it, I was right. Though predicting that a modern-day Star Wars project is going to be garbage isn't particularly anything noteworthy. It's equivalent to betting George R.R. Martin will never finish The Winds of Winter. We're still waiting, George. But by all means, Obi-Wan was the last legacy character that Disney Lucasfilm hadn't totally shat all over. Despite how devastating the sequels were to the overall continuity of Star Wars,
somehow Palpatine returned.
Obi-Wan's characterization and contributions to the universe remained mostly intact. But now the circle is officially complete. The creative leads for the show waste no time at all retconning and denigrating him into a bumbling moron, who's repeatedly outbested by a 10-year-old Leia.
Are you sure he's even on this planet?
They know what they're doing, Leia.
If somebody is offering us help, I think we should take it. Now come on.
This is yet another product of the corporate Lucasfilm model. Generate relentless hype by shoving nostalgia bait down fans' throats, only to subvert their expectations by sidelining the main character, all while propping up a female protag who realistically should have very little impact at this point in the storyline, and provide unbelievable amounts of screen time for horrendously incompetent villains. The show may not have been the driving force behind the death of Star Wars, but it's most certainly the thick 30 layers of duct tape encasing the entire coffin. And I genuinely take no pleasure pointing out that this universe that I was once so deeply invested in and passionate over is now nothing more than an unrecognizable husk of its former self. A franchise Frankensteined back together with the sole intent of maliciously deconstructing beloved characters and lore. Because if there was any shred of doubt that the corporate overlords at Disney and Lucasfilm actively refuse to give fans the story material they want, this show is the smoking gun that proves that shred of doubt to be absolute horseshit. Either way, I'm sure there are those of you watching who aren't quite convinced, so without any further delay, let's jump right on in. Within the first few minutes of the show, we're immediately introduced to the Inquisitors, a group of Force-sensitive dark side users tasked with hunting down the remaining Jedi. But more specifically, we're introduced to Reva, the main antagonist of the show? Still feels a bit weird to say out loud since it realistically should be Vader, but I guess Hayden Christensen's casting was just another marketing ploy to get people to watch this absolute dumpster fire. So all of his hatred and obsession with having Obi-Wan hunted down is transplanted onto Reva.
You will forget this fixation with Kenobi, or I will relieve you of your duties. Is that clear?
Now, if you're concerned that her motivations seem to make absolutely no sense whatsoever, I assure you, they will make less sense as the story progresses. But I want you to keep in mind how insistent the Grand Inquisitor is towards Reva to have her drop her obsession with tracking down Obi-Wan, because it will become extremely relevant later on. Regardless, we're then presented with our first of many instances of the Inquisitors being complete fucking idiots.
Do you know the key to hunting Jedi, friend? It is patience. Passion has been his undoing.
Right. So there's a few hundred problems with just yeeting a knife at this man's face. First off, what if the Jedi you were searching for just simply wasn't in this bar and you ended up killing this rando? The Inquisitors as an organization will lose a significant amount of credibility, especially if word of this incident spread to other planets. Not to mention that you also would have just murdered somebody in cold blood who may very well have given you the information you needed. It's frankly a miracle that anyone in the Star Wars universe would ever be supportive of the Empire, when being evil in this show inherently turns you into a drooling mouth breather. But to make matters worse, we also shouldn't forget that Force users can sense other Force users.
You're no Jedi.
So what fucking gives? Why even bother with this setup when you can effectively just pinpoint the Jedi you're searching for through the Force? With the show supposedly dedicated towards one of the last remaining Jedi, and arguably one of the most powerful Force users to ever exist, you naturally assume that the Force as a concept would be explored rather deeply, and there are moments where that does happen.
The Force. What does it feel like?
Have you ever been afraid of the dark? How does it feel when you turn on the light?
I feel safe.
Yes, it feels like that.
But those scenes are incredibly too few and far between. They are drops of water in a vast desert of plot holes, contrivances, retcons, horrendous action choreography, and fundamentally awful character design. It seems like all 5 writers of the show were all competing to see who could out-stupid the other, because that can be the only explanation for why this next clip exists.
What the fuck?
It's a piece of cloth. Just run through the gap, you lizard-brained fucks. Or walk around it. Or just force push the debris out of your way because you all are supposedly trained and highly experienced Jedi hunters. It's remarkable that for a series following the events of various Force users across the galaxy, there's hardly a moment in the narrative where it's ever used in even the most basic of circumstances. That our imposing villains who are supposed to be setting the stakes for the overall conflict are immediately stopped dead in their tracks by something that is
barely an inconvenience.
Also, why did Egghead here randomly decide to turn to the light side for 5 seconds? I thought the Inquisitor's whole thing was executing the remaining Jedi. That should surely be a major breach in protocol and most definitely stir up suspicion from the other members. But I guess the both of them end up getting selective short-term memory loss because neither one ever bothers to bring it up again.
Oh, that's embarrassing.
After the absolute attack on my life that was that scene though, we then cut away to Obi-Wan living his best life, stealing some meat, hanging out with Jawas, and creeping on Luke. Truthfully, and somewhat surprisingly, I didn't really take any massive issues with this material. And it's a shame that so little time is spent on it, because I was hoping that the series would focus more on the introspective aspects of Obi-Wan's character. Maybe delving further into his back history/training, or showing us new memories between him and aNaKiN that were never portrayed on screen, bolstering their brotherhood that was never fully realized in the prequels. But naturally, this is discount Star Wars, where the main character of the series is forced to the sidelines to make room for a 10-year-old Leia who borderlines on being a Mary Sue.
You think the less you say, the less you give away. But really, it's the opposite. Your father. You want him to like you, so you repeat what he says, even though you don't really know what it means. You've never made one decision for yourself in your entire life, and you never will. You seem kind of old and beat up.
Imagine being handed an entire universe, with endless possibilities and characters at your disposal to explore, only to dedicate your entire story around someone who realistically should be one of the least involved people at this point in the Star Wars timeline.
And I loved the idea, similar to, how they've done something like Logan or Joker, of taking one character out of a big franchise, and then also with a limited series, having the time to really go in depth and have it be character driven.
You need to shut the fuck up!
God, she's just as insufferable as Mr. 16 times the detail. Regardless, if Disney desperately wants to create a narrative focused on Leia's childhood, then that's totally fine. But I don't think I'm necessarily going out on too much of a limb here when I say that most people aren't expecting that story to be crammed in a show called Obi-Wan fucking Kenobi. I know the writing staff are a bunch of creatively bankrupt NPCs who are only capable of spamming the subvert audience expectations command, but that flavor of the month has gotten extremely old very quickly. And I can't imagine that the audience is too thrilled that the creative leads are still this drastically behind on software updates. However, we then cut back to Obi-Wan returning from his daily stalking session, only to end up running into the Jedi from the beginning of the episode, which already tosses a massive wrench into the narrative because this total rando was tracked down by a group of Jedi hunters just a few moments ago, which presents the very strong possibility that he could have ended up luring them to Obi-Wan and in turn resulting with them finding out about Luke. But then again, these Inquisitors are easily duped by loose fabric, so what the hell do I know? During their conversation, though, this rando Jedi begs Obi-Wan for his help.
You must leave. You'll draw too much attention.
But I have nowhere to go. They're hunting me. You have to help me.
What do you mean you have nowhere else to go? Tatooine is a whole-ass planet. There are other places to keep a low profile at other than Mos Eisley, Anchorhead, and Mos Espa. Even then, I'm sure if you didn't go around using the Force in the most obvious ways possible, you could still easily maintain a low profile in those cities. But despite this guy being an absolute moron, Obi-Wan goes out of his way to give him some sagely advice.
You want my help? Take this. Walk into the middle of the desert and bury it in the ground.
What happened to you? You were once a great Jedi.
I'm not entirely sure how this could come as an absolute shock to you. It's been a whole decade since the events of Order 66. Surely for having been on the run for 10 years, you'd have realized by now that the fight has been over for quite some time. Though, disbarring all those issues, this interaction still rings hollow because there's no connection between these two characters other than the fact that they're both Jedi. By establishing some personal history between the two of them, whether having served together during the Clone Wars, or depicting occasional run-ins on Coruscant, make the prospect of letting go of any semblance of personal attachment to do what's best for Luke be that much more difficult of a moral dilemma for Obi-Wan to wrestle with. This is the type of character writing that should be present in this show, but simply isn't. Instead, any potential of that is brushed aside in order to push the next vacuous plot point. Speaking of which, we then cut away to Owen confronting Ben about creeping on Luke and leaving him gifts.
We talked about this. When the time comes, he must be trained.
Like you trained his father?
Yes. Anakin falling to the dark side was entirely due to Obi-Wan's training. It most definitely wasn't the old evil Sith Lord disguised as a Republic official who managed to convince and assure Anakin that he could help save his dying, pregnant wife. I mean, seriously, how could Obi-Wan have known that Anakin was swayed towards the dark side? He was assigned to take down Grievous prior to the events leading up to Order 66. Obi-Wan experiencing some form of misplaced guilt is a valid insecurity for him to tackle with internally, but it's not a judgment that should be levied at him from others, because anyone with even half a brain cell and a general understanding of the situation wouldn't lay the blame at Obi-Wan's feet. And Owen would most certainly have a clear understanding of what went down because Obi-Wan at some point would have told him this personally. How else would he have learned that Anakin fell to the dark side? However, much like this random lady's arm, their conversation is cut short due to a couple of Inquisitors demanding answers from the locals.
You know something?
My family's of no concern to you.
It might be. You got a Jedi on that farm too? Tell me where the Jedi is, or this man and his family die!
So at this point, the jig should just be up. Not just from the fact that Owen is now on Reva's radar, which would in turn put the rest of his family on her radar, but also because it's made adamantly clear throughout all of Star Wars that Force users can detect nearby Force users.
You're no Jedi.
So, based on this alone, the plot is already fundamentally broken. From a general understanding of the Force and how the Jedi/Sith are able to interact with it, Obi-Wan's position should absolutely be compromised. And while I will give the writer some credit for recognizing how absolutely fucked the continuity would be if Vader and the Inquisitors actually did manage to find out that Obi-Wan was on Tatooine, it in turn muddies the waters when it comes to the Force and why certain abilities are used in one circumstance but not the other. Meanwhile, on Alderaan, Leia decides to sneak off to play in the forest, only to end up getting ambushed by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And naturally, this wouldn't be Disney Star Wars without a pointless and unbearably brain-dead chase sequence.
This is not okay. This needs to stop now.
Does everyone in the Star Wars universe over the age of 10 have the agility of a beached space whale? It's downright pathetic that these mercenaries whose literal profession it is to hunt down other people are getting borderline outplayed by a 10-year-old child and are blindsided by the existence of trees.
Oh, that's embarrassing.
But then again, it's basically canon that bounty hunters in general are total morons, so maybe I'm the one expecting entirely too much from a show with a $150 million budget. We then cut back to Tatooine to discover that the Inquisitors have finally managed to overcome their irrational fear of cloth and end up killing the Jedi they were initially searching for. Though they still haven't quite figured out how to do a lynching. Because it's not like there's an ability exclusive to the dark side of the Force that's used explicitly to choke people to death. I guess the concept of suffocation is somehow completely foreign to them. Regardless, later on in the episode, Obi-Wan arrives back from town to find Bail Organa chilling in his cave.
She's headed for Dayu. They hid their signature behind a freight transport.
The ship is on its way there now. There is no one I trust more with my child than you.
That's right, not even Bail is exempt from being turned into an utter brainlet. He's a well-regarded galactic senator with an abundant amount of connections and resources at his disposal, who just so happens to know where his kidnapped daughter is being taken to, but yet his go-to plan is to travel clear across the galaxy to ask Obi-Wan, who is extremely wanted by the Empire, by the way, to neglect his obligations with protecting Luke and go rescue his daughter. And maybe that wouldn't be such a horrible idea, provided it didn't run the potential of Bail getting followed and having both their respective covers blown, but there's still the glaring issue that Leia was ultimately Bail's responsibility.
My wife and I will take the girl. We've always talked of adopting a baby girl.
And now he's emotionally manipulated Obi-Wan into pawning that responsibility onto him.
This isn't about the boy, and you know it. You've made mistakes. We all did.
Move on. Be done with it. You couldn't save Anakin, but you can save her.
So that's already a massive blemish on Bail's character, and we're only one episode in. But because Obi-Wan has the backbone of an eel, he inevitably caves to Bail, digs up his old lightsaber, and boards a public transport ship headed for Dayu, where upon arrival he bumps into a very chatty pickpocket.
There's a Jedi. He helps people. I'll take you to him for the right price.
Well, holy hell, that was easy. A little too easy, in fact. The Inquisitors flew all the way out to the Outer Rim just due to rumors of a Jedi operating out of this saloon. But this kid is just nonchalantly running around blabbing to random strangers on the street that he knows a Jedi. Seems like an incredibly risky con to pull considering his primary clientele consists of Force-sensitive people.
Thank you for helping us, Haja.
Oh, the Jedi must protect their own. With your son's abilities, they will come for him.
Either way, after having just watched a family get screwed out of all their money, Obi-Wan finally steps in to confront the con man. Conveniently, Haja just so happens to know where Leia is being kept and agrees to help Obi-Wan get her back.
All right, if it's the sewers you want, there's only one place to go. But you'll never get in.
Yeah, that's a bit of a tough sell for me to buy, when all it took for Obi-Wan to break in was to steal this random dude's clothes, pass through an unguarded door, and walk directly up to a lab official to steal their keycard. Not particularly a whole lot of security set up for a trafficking ring. Now, the immediate counter to that would be it was all set up to capture Kenobi, so there wasn't supposed to be that many guards preventing him from getting in. Which would make an ounce of sense if Leia was being held in a different facility. But all of these mercs are aware that they're dealing with the Jedi, and leaving Leia in the same general vicinity of Obi-Wan is a massive risk for them to take, especially since their whole plan for capturing him is just hoping that he opens the one door that's specifically set up as a trap. Though through sheer dumb luck, their plan somehow pans off. Obi-Wan is officially outed as a Jedi, along with revealing a link between him and Leia, thereby outing the Organas as Jedi sympathizers and massively contradicting canon.
I'm a member of the Imperial Senate on a diplomatic mission to Alderaan.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away!
It seems that there was a very valid reason for why George left such a large gap between the events of Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. Because trying to incorporate anything else into the mix during this time window of the SKYWALkEr saga runs the exponential risk of tarnishing the world building set in place with the original trilogy, as we're so clearly seeing it play out here. Because the people who are paid money to write this garbage don't seem to realize that Leia couldn't have operated in secrecy with the rebellion during her time as a senator, or even have served on the Senate for that matter, because her family's now openly known reputation as Jedi sympathizers would make the Organas enemies of the Empire. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Everyone is entitled to enjoy whatever it is that they enjoy. But to claim that this show is a proper continuation or portrayal of the franchise is objectively false, because there are so many staunch examples of the creative leads actively damaging the artistic integrity of this universe and the characters that exist within it. Moving on, however, after Obi-Wan miraculously ends up rescuing Leia, we're then given another stunning revelation.
I found a link between him and Organa in the archives. I used the girl as bait.
You found it in the archives? How did Sidious, or Vader, or hell, anybody else in the Empire never stumble upon this info? And if this was information that anybody affiliated with the Empire could access at any point, then why wasn't a plan like this enacted sooner? And what incentive would Reva have to not inform the other Inquisitors of this connection until now? In her risky gamble of a plan to apprehend a Jedi who's managed to evade the Empire for 10 fucking years, she decides the best course of action is to keep a group of highly trained Force users completely in the dark.
Not a great plan.
And speaking of things that make zero sense, a bounty is then placed on Obi-Wan where upon discovering this, Leia comes to a very unusual conclusion.
You're the reason I'm here. They took me to get to you. How do I know you're not the real kidnapper?
You have to trust me.
Maybe because he rescued you from the holding cell that you were being held captive in? And he'd have zero incentive to break you out of that facility if he was the kidnapper, you absolute potato brain? I have to say, it's a bit strange for an insightfully wise child prodigy to have the cognitive reasoning of a hamster.
You think the less you say, the less you give away. But really, it's the opposite. How do I know you're not the real kidnapper?
You have to trust me, Leia.
You aren't a Jedi.
Your father is a very old friend.
I don't believe you.
Why are you the way that you are?
But the writing can only be as smart as the writer, I suppose. We're then subjected to, without doubt, the most autistic chase sequence I've ever seen in my entire life. Where do I even begin with all this? So it's already embarrassing that Obi-Wan is getting physically outbested and outsmarted by a 10-year-old child. But it's even worse when you compound that this whole chase scene would have ended a hell of a lot sooner if he wasn't arbitrarily shit with the Force all of a sudden. Now it'd be one thing if we were shown that Obi-Wan voluntarily cut himself off from the Force. It's a precedent that's been established in other Star Wars content, and it would certainly explain his inability to use it throughout the first 2 episodes. But the standard this show attempts to lay out is that he's simply inept with it because he hasn't used the Force in a while? However, we know for a fact that Jedi don't just become unattuned to the Force from a lack of using it, based off of this line alone from A New Hope.
I felt a great disturbance in the Force, as if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced.
And there's also the glaring issue of Yoda being able to lift an X-Wing after a prolonged period of having not used the Force. So that premise is what some might call bullshit. Also, on a completely different note, I can't get over Leia just deciding to jump off a goddamn building.
Leia, jump! No! Leia, no!
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
She doesn't even come remotely close to making that gap, and she had plenty of space to hide behind cover. So quite frankly, I have no idea what Leia thought she was going to accomplish here other than falling to her imminent death. Especially if she didn't believe that Obi-Wan was a real Jedi.
You have to trust me, Leia.
You aren't a Jedi.
Your father is a very old friend.
I don't believe you.
Shut up! Will you shut up?
Fortunately, all the bounty hunters that were chasing them down just randomly decide to give up for some reason, allowing Obi-Wan and Leia to escape to the spaceport. And along the way, they end up bumping into Haja.
You need another exit. It's a cargo port, it's fully automated. They won't be looking for you there. I'm trying to make amends. I got that family safe, and I'm gonna do the same for you.
The creative leads desperately want to attach meaningful arcs to their characters, all without putting in the effort to display them undergoing meaningful transformations and realizations on screen. Haja going out of his way to make amends gives the viewer a serious case of whiplash, because his only connection in history with Obi-Wan is that he uncovered his money-making scheme. Based on everything we're shown and know about Haja, he should have zero incentive to help the both of them, because there's an enormous amount of risk attached to aiding and associating with a Jedi highly wanted by the Empire. Or at least there should be. Shortly after their interaction, Haja then decides to confront Reva in order to buy Obi-Wan more time.
You're no Jedi, but you know where one is. What did you ask? You know what? I'm not gonna answer it. I don't need you to.
Now I feel we should address the rather large bantha in the room. It's strange enough that Reva is seemingly the only person out of all the Inquisitors with this ability, but if she was always capable of force-pulling information out of people, then why did she refuse to do it whenever she suspected Owen of knowing something? Either she's just wildly incompetent, which, let's be real, she absolutely is, or she just magically gained this ability out of nowhere. Because had she bothered to force-pull information out of Owen's brain, she would have uncovered Obi-Wan's location, along with discovering Luke's identity. The most crucial secret in the galaxy that needed to be kept would eventually reach its way to Vader, compromising Obi-Wan's cover, and contradicting the events of A New Hope. However, the most charitable interpretation of this scene is that Reva just arbitrarily gained this ability out of thin air, force-hammering a contrivance into the narrative in order to conveniently give our antagonist exactly what she needs to reach the next plot point. Whatever the case may be, both still end up creating massive breaks in the script. Moving on though, Obi-Wan ends up discovering a stunning revelation?
You didn't know. aNaKiN Skywalker is alive.
Well, no fucking shit.
Yeah, he knows. Because he already learned that aNaKiN was Darth Vader during Revenge of the Sith.
Now, Lord Vader, go and bring peace to the Empire.
And naturally, he'd have gained a notable reputation around the galaxy after a 10-year period of being Darth Vader.
That doesn't look good.
It isn't. It's him.
If this show had taken place a year or two after Revenge of the Sith, then maybe this scene would actually create some legitimate tension between Reva and Obi-Wan. But this interaction falls incredibly flat in context with the rest of Star Wars canon. The Grand Inquisitor then suddenly shows up out of nowhere to tell Reva off.
Oh, sister! I can stand the reek of your ambition no longer, and I cannot risk you losing him again. Move aside.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I got nothing. The Grand Inquisitor gains nothing by stopping her from hunting down Obi-Wan, and Reva doesn't even consider the potential fallout or consequences that killing off the Grand Inquisitor could cause. And we also shouldn't neglect that our villains don't seem to understand the concept of object fucking permanence. If either one of them was equipped with the arduous skill of looking over or around boxes, this whole scene would play out much differently. At least I would hope. But because this show takes place in a universe where Inquisitors have the attention span of an autistic squirrel, their dispute causes enough of a distraction for Obi-Wan and Leia to escape to the planet of Mapuzo, only to land and discover that the contact they were supposed to meet up with is nowhere to be found. All hope seems lost until they come across a transport shuttle driver named Freck. Freck is objectively the best character in this entire show. While his motivations may quite literally be written on the wall, we at least know what they are and why he believes them to be true. He's the sole person in this entire series that not only consistently operates within his character, but does so competently. Now whether that makes him a morally good person is another matter entirely, but at least he doesn't go around using random innocent people as meat shields. That's right, Obi-Wan Kenobi, celebrated general of the Clone Wars, and one of the few paragons of the Jedi Order who suffered the wrath of the dark side but never surrendered to it, decides the best means of taking out these Stormtroopers is to use an unarmed civilian for a meat shield.
What a bitch.
Not to mention that doing so is insanely unnecessary since these troopers pose no obstacle for him whatsoever, physically and mentally.
They're moving us around, looking for a Jedi.
A Jedi? Out here?
Oh, no, we'll find him. We always do.
Do you have any information about a Jedi?
I would know one if I saw one.
Well, just keep your eyes open. Report it if you see anything.
Unfortunately, all of the clownery you've seen to this point is dwarfed by what is about to happen next.
Just let her go.
Just force pull the gun out of his hand, you walking sack of brain rot. Or mind trick him into letting Leia go. Or literally anything else besides trying to pull a John Wick-style trick shot. Why would you put the life of the person you're trying to protect at such unbelievable risk?
Actually, Obi-Wan sucks with the Force now.
Wrong, sir. Wrong.
He somehow saved Leia from discovering the hard way how gravity works, so that excuse is no longer on the table. There are moments where such an absurd amount of stupid shit is compiled into one scene that it breaks any semblance of immersion and reminds you of the fact that someone out there, right now, is getting paid actual money to turn the characters and continuity of Star Wars into Swiss cheese. And I wish I could say this is the worst and only example in the show, but I assure you, it isn't. Not even by a mile. Moving on though, our protags end up getting Deus Ex Machina'd by Tala, an Imperial spy.
I'm the spy.
And to call her a character in this show would be incredibly generous. In reality, Tala's basically a glorified plot device used to get Obi-Wan from point A to point B, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but it's pretty clear that the show desperately wants to have Tala have a long-lasting impact on Obi-Wan and Leia, so there needs to be more put into her character other than having her be a walking void of personality that spews expository dialogue.
14 people died and 6 of them were children, and I couldn't do anything to help them. So now I do this. One for everyone I get through.
However, just as Tala is fixing to lead them down the path, Obi-Wan suddenly feels a great disturbance in his loins. That's right, they had to work that Darth Vader cameo in to avoid false advertising allegations somehow. So Obi-Wan is ultimately presented with two choices. Either continue traveling down the tunnel, escorting Leia to safety and fulfilling his promise to Bail, or confront Vader and spare these townspeople from an otherwise gruesome death. Which one do you think he'll pick? Go ahead, I'll wait. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but regardless of what you picked, you're still wrong. He instead decides to abandon Leia so that he can watch these civilians get choked to death like an absolute psychopath. But don't you worry, because this episode is far from done with assassinating Obi-Wan's character.
Stop being such a pussy, Obi-Wan.
If this scene isn't the perfect encapsulation of Disney Lucasfilm's creative bankruptcy. There's no verticality added to the fight, providing tension and serving as yet another obstacle to the duel. There's no interesting set pieces for the characters to interact with and utilize, not to mention that there's hardly any effort or design put into the actual choreography itself. Some of these criticisms may be more subjective than others, but if you were to compare this fight to say Duel of the Fates, or the Bespin fight in Empire, they aren't even remotely on the same level. For this being the first time Obi-Wan and Anakin fought since Revenge of the Sith, you naturally assume a multi-billion-dollar company would put more into the duel than deciding to film in the dark outside a random quarry. I've seen remarkably better results from fan films. And while we're still relatively on the subject, I think now is the perfect time to bring up a very particular line from A New Hope.
We meet again at last. When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master.
We meet again at last are particularly important words to keep in mind here, because if they've had other run-ins prior to their fight in A New Hope, one of which resulting in Obi-Wan kicking his ass again, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Then Vader remarking, "at last," during their conversation seems incredibly out of place. However, none of that is as weird as what's about to happen next. Vader, what are you doing? Put the damn fire out. Is your cooldown on cooldown or something? You literally extinguished it just a few seconds ago. Or maybe force pull him back into the fire? I don't know, I'm just spitballing ideas here, and all of them are better than you just standing there like some lobotomized buckethead. Oh, and I neglected to mention that Tala also decides to play ditch the kid and rescues Obi-Wan at the 11th hour, resulting in Leia getting captured by Reva. Even though she didn't stumble upon this hideout until hours later and somehow magically managed to get to the end of the tunnel before Leia. Because we can't actually have our villains do something resourceful to achieve their end goal. We have to have her throw a Kylo Ren-style temper tantrum and force teleport exactly where the plot needs her to be. Cause and effect be damned, I guess. Now, because you are a sane person and decided to not make an hour-long video about this tumor of a show, you're more than likely under the reasonable assumption that the writing can't possibly get any worse. But in almost impressive fashion, from here on out is where things start to get really goddamn stupid. So we effectively kick things off with Obi-Wan waking up after having recovered from his wounds. Turns out, bacta tanks can completely heal third-degree burns. Which, fair enough, but if we're to consistently apply this across the board, then Obi-Wan should absolutely need the same type of breathing apparatus as Vader. And to say that they didn't or shouldn't have suffered the same type of burns is a little bit insane, because aNaKiN sustained his from indirect heat and was completely engulfed in flames. Imagine how horrific and crippling Obi-Wan should be, considering he was forced down against direct flames for an extended period of time. But through the power of plot armor, anything is possible, including breaking into a highly guarded, top-secret Imperial base.
I don't see any shields.
That's because no one would be stupid enough to attack them.
I guess none of the Inquisitors ever bothered to look into repairing the shields after Cal Kestis broke in and thrashed the place.
I've disabled the shields on the outer sections of the fortress.
Also, wouldn't the stupid thing be to not infiltrate the base while it has no shields? You said so yourself, no one outside of the Empire has managed to see the inside of this facility. The whole point of having shields is to fortify the thing you're wanting to protect, and it would only make sense that the Empire would want to keep one of their highly classified bases secure. It'd be like if I designed a safe with no lock on it, because I didn't think anyone would be stupid enough to actually try and crack the safe. However, during this whole exchange, we learn why it's so imperative to break Leia out of that facility.
She knows everything. Where we are, what we're doing.
That's right, she knows everything. She knows about the path, where they operate out of, and all the specifics of what they do. Which means her capture could very well jeopardize their entire organization. If only they hadn't entrusted the inner dealings of their highly illegal operation to a 10-year-old child. As a consequence of all this, Tala decides to tag along with Obi-Wan to get Leia back.
Well, I have officer clearance. I can get you inside and I can get you access.
Is your cover still intact?
We'll find out soon enough.
Why would you think there's even remotely a chance that you still have officer clearance? It was a stretch that you still had it after gunning down those Stormtroopers, and you most definitely shouldn't have it after being seen helping arguably the most wanted person in the Empire escape off-world. But apparently murder isn't considered that serious of a crime within the Empire, so it all ends up checking out. On the way to the fortress, Tala and Obi-Wan end up having a nice casual chat.
Your body's not the only thing that needs to heal, Ben. The past is a hard thing to forget, and you just need time, that's all.
I thought we were done with the whole Obi-Wan being shit with the Force thing back in episode 2. I'm aware that this is more so brought up as an unsuccessful attempt to have Tala be an actual character, but frankly I'm not sure why the creative leads even bothered, since this never presents itself as an obstacle in the narrative going forward. Speaking of which, Tala successfully docks inside the base's hangar bay and proceeds to make her way past security clearance.
This isn't your sector. I can't let you through.
Then I'm your commanding officer, and you will address me as Sir.
Yes, sir, of course, but...
I'm here with classified intelligence. Do you know what classified means?
That's not how any of this works, you complete plank of wood. You don't just gain clearance to classified areas or sectors due to your military rank. Otherwise, a lot of information wouldn't be considered top secret if any officer could just stumble in and access it at any time. If the Empire doesn't enforce and strictly adhere to security protocols, then why even bother with having them in the first goddamn place? Why bother with even having the scene at all if she's able just to casually stroll on through anyways? There are a great number of questions that you could throw at this script that it wouldn't really have any valid answers for. Such as how they're going to sneak Obi-Wan into the base. Tala managed to get in, but that was due to her officer clearance, that she realistically shouldn't have access to anymore, but whatever. Though surely the Empire would have learned their lesson after Fallen Order. Right? Right?
Ben, I'm overriding an entry port. It should be right ahead of you.
Thank God no one ever thought to equip this incredibly fortified base with sonar detection, otherwise Obi-Wan would be a little screwed. Though once again, through sheer dumb luck, he manages to break in and sneak past some droids. I have to say, it sure is convenient that this droid, which is programmed explicitly to monitor this section of the base, is unequipped with the functionality of opening doors. I guess the Empire really should have looked into that. And now that I'm thinking about this more, if the people who are running this base are aware that their droids can't open doors, then why have the doors in this section of the base be programmed to be closable in the first place? Seems like a pretty glaring oversight, but what do I know? I'm no electrician. As all of this is happening though, Tala is caught in the act and is forced to strangle a motherfucker out in the middle of the open. Just to be clear, in case any of this isn't already insane enough on face value, this woman is able to choke out a dude twice her size in the middle of a workplace, and no one at any point ever takes notice of this guy gasping for breath, or walks in to find him passed out in the middle of the floor.
I had some company. But it's been taken care of.
No, it hasn't. This is quite the opposite of it being taken care of, actually. We are at DEFCON 1 levels of emergency here. It seems downright impossible that Tala has managed to maintain her cover within the Empire for as long as she has, considering she's as resourceful and stealthy as Juggernaut.
I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
Meanwhile, Reva finally decides to try and force pull the information from Leia's brain.
It's the sister contest.
Wonderful. This child who's had zero training or experience with the Force is able to effortlessly resist the most powerful Force user out of all the Inquisitors. I'm trying to think of who else that reminds me of. Now, of course, the defense for this is that she's strong-willed, but that justification kind of crumbles to pieces when considering there were very few exceptions to this rule, and it's rather far-fetched to claim that a con man who swindled countless people out of their money has a weaker mental fortitude than a 10-year-old child. Still, this leaves the two characters at an impasse, forcing Reva to use her torture machine to extract the information. Fortunately, Tala is able to provide enough of a distraction to buy Obi-Wan more time to rescue Leia, but because Reva is conveniently a walking polygraph test, she snuffs out that Tala is lying and has her arrested. Now that would be extremely significant if that as a plot point actually ended up going anywhere. Hell, who knows, maybe it would have if Stormtroopers didn't have the vulnerability of a piece of paper. I'm frankly a little confused why they're even in the show at all. They never serve as any form of obstacle or challenge in the narrative. And don't you dare try to tell me that Stormtroopers have always been stupid, because we've seen countless examples in the OT where they most definitely weren't. It was universally understood that with the Empire having a standing army, some troopers were naturally going to be more skilled than others, because that's kind of how armies work. But Disney has now effectively made it canon that all of them just suck. At one point during their escape, though, Obi-Wan is having to keep the glass from shattering and completely flooding the corridor they're in. Good thing that there wasn't a scene towards the beginning of this episode highlighting that he's shit with the Force again. That would make things incredibly complicated. Also, I'm a little thrown off by how insistent these troopers are to get this door open when it's so painstakingly obvious that this hallway's about to flood. I figured their helmets just gave them shit aim, not permanently blind them. In the final stretch of their escape, the defining moment that will determine whether or not all of their efforts will have panned off is totally undermined by absolute clownery.
No, 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 no.
You know what? I take it back. Modern day Lucasfilm isn't just creatively bankrupt, they are creatively brain dead. Because only someone who is brain dead could unironically think this piss stain of a scene belongs in a Star Wars title. Just when you think this franchise has finally sunk down to the bottom of the sludge pile, an entirely new pit opens up and swallows it down even further. Moving on though, Reva then confronts the three of them just before they're about to board Tala's ship.
A child and an old man. Was it worth it?
I don't see any shields.
That's because no one would be stupid enough to attack them.
See, now that's some bullshit.
This is a whole-ass base, and you're meaning to tell me no one managed to detect or spot these snowspeeders casually strolling up to the hangar bay? If 2 fighters managed to cause this much damage, imagine what a whole squadron could pull off. But putting all of that aside, if there was any doubt that a link exists between Obi-Wan and the Organas, it's essentially been blown to bits here. There would be countless witnesses who could verify that he was seen helping Leia escape, and an extensive amount of camera footage capturing the entire event. At this rate, Bail's days as a senator should be over, along with their families standing amongst the Empire. I will keep hammering this home until it is crystal clear. This show cannot exist within the rest of canon. But naturally, we can't just top things off there, we need to have a predictably dramatic character death.
Wait!
Oh no, not that guy. I remember that one time where he said the thing, and he clearly meant so much to this random Asian lady too. Man, Wade will sorely be missed. Anyways, Vader is pretty pissed that Reva allowed Obi-Wan to escape.
You were born what defeat would bring.
I put a tracker on the ship. Soon the location of the network and Kenobi will be ours.
You see, she totally meant for Obi-Wan to break into their top secret base, mow down whole deployments of troopers, flood entire sections of the facility, and escape with the prisoners she was attempting to extract valuable information from. It's not like the tracker/restraining bolt attached to her droid can easily be removed or anything. She also seriously lucked out that Vader never viewed this as a colossal failure on her part, because we all know what happens to people who fail Vader.
Speed, and we're preparing to...
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
In fact, Vader should view all of this as a total failure, since he's made it adamantly clear to Reva that Obi-Wan is the only thing that matters.
Kenobi is all that matters now.
And given her obsession with having Obi-Wan captured, willfully letting the 3 of them escape staunchly goes against her own interests. Now I'm a man of my word, I set out to cover the entire first season of Kenobi, and I fully intend on keeping that promise. But to save us both the trouble and unnecessary torture, I'll be skipping a fair amount of what happens in Episode 5. This one is certainly no exception when it comes to being completely riddled with flaws, though there are definitely some that are more pertinent than others. I'm not perfect though, I'm surely bound to touch on something that people will perceive as nitpicky, and if that turns out to be the case...
That's too damn bad!
So following the absolute train wreck that was Episode 4, we're shown Vader appointing Reva as Grand Inquisitor. Apparently murdering your commanding officer and fucking up on a cataclysmic scale is the fast track for success within the Imperial Inquisition. One would assume that this decision would not go over well with the others, especially since her refusal to share incredibly relevant information and plans with apprehending major targets has cost them a lot. There is, of course, an ulterior motive with this decision, but we'll most definitely be sticking a pin in that one for later. Shortly thereafter, Tala, Obi-Wan, and Leia arrive back on Jabeam to find a group of refugees waiting to board the next transport shuttle. Everything seems relatively fine until the Empire activates Lila's evil mode, causing it to go absolutely haywire and sabotage the hangar door controls. If only Obi-Wan or Leia had found it strange that the person who's been hunting them down this entire time went out of her way to repair the droid that she destroyed and return it back to Leia. However, after several unsuccessful attempts to override the doors, we get this zinger of a line from Proto-Rey.
I'm going to need a ladder.
Do as she asks.
How about no?
First off, let's talk about how utterly insane it is that the rebels designed this base with no way for anyone to access this electrical panel, and that no one here other than a child has the technical knowledge to fix the wiring in this facility. There's also the extremely high possibility that Leia could electrocute herself and potentially sabotage this base even further. So Obi-Wan should 1000% not be on board with having her do this, let alone ensuring her safety to the con man from Episode 2. More on that later. But let's examine having this transport ship be their surefire means of escape, because there are a few glaring issues with that. Namely being the Star Destroyer that is currently in orbit, which would shoot them down well before their transport shuttle ever left the planet's atmosphere.
What's happening?
The controls aren't responding.
An Imperial destroyer just arrived in orbit above us.
Opening the hangar doors should invite complete annihilation. Though despite the Empire having an abundant amount of resources and manpower at their disposal, they only send 2 detachments of Stormtroopers. What an absolute force to be reckoned with. Reva then arrives to the party where she and Obi-Wan decide to have a nice casual chat.
You knew who Vader was. Vader would have kept that hidden. The night of Order 66, you were a youngling.
I am in absolute shock, truly. This plot twist totally wasn't screamed from the rooftops during the very beginning of the very first episode, and nothing with this material makes Reva's motivations and disdain toward Obi-Wan convoluted as hell whatsoever. We all know she didn't have insanely other opportune moments to take out Vader. She specifically needs Obi-Wan because she's mad at him for not stopping Order 66. I guess. Lucasfilm, having your characters be confused doesn't inherently make them nuanced or complex. It makes them insufferable. However, she then decides that she's tired of doing the whole siege thing. You could have done this the entire time? Why did you freak out earlier about them holding out for days if you knew you could cut through these blast doors in sheer seconds? God, everything about this character is the worst. Either way, given how many Stormtroopers there are, the Proto-Rebels should without question be screwed here. As in mowed down instantly. The worst case scenario ended up happening. Your blast doors aren't capable of sealing off the Imperial forces, and with this being an active military force, you'd assume that they'd be aware of the existence of thermal detonators. Oh look, a thermal detonator. Tala, for the love of God, you know grenades are meant to be thrown, right? If you had bothered just to chunk it a few feet away from you, there's an extremely high possibility that you would have wiped out a considerable number of their forces and even lived to talk about it. Crazy idea, I know, asking for people to use common sense in a Star Wars show? Downright unthinkable. I suppose Tala was painfully oblivious to the fact that robots can be repaired, some incredibly more so than others.
Much better.
Well, so much for droid sentience. The only positive thing I can give this show is that it doesn't tout whatever weird robo-sexual fetish agenda that Solo was trying to push. Though I was a little disappointed that we didn't get any sick boss fight music during this scene. While all of this is going on, Obi-Wan out of nowhere decides to give Haja his lightsaber and communicator that he uses specifically to reach Bail with. I'm sure this decision will not remotely affect the plot whatsoever. Turns out his galaxy brain plan to buy the rebels more time to escape is to turn himself in as a means of luring Vader here and offering Reva the chance to take him out together. Again, that's not an outright horrible idea, but how do you expect to take him on without a weapon? Were you just hoping that Reva had a spare lightsaber lying around that you could use? And why would you be under any assumption that she'd be willing to accept your offer, especially when she's had ample opportunity in the past to take Vader out? She's been pretty insistent with her personal vendetta against you, albeit for incredibly bizarre and unfounded reasons. Plus, Vader would still arrive at the base regardless of your capture. It's outright strange that he's not here already. But in equally unusual fashion, Reva decides to send Obi-Wan, the most wanted Jedi in the entire galaxy, who has managed to evade the Empire for over a decade, off to another section of the base with 2 Stormtroopers. I think we all know how that plan panned out last time. At this point, I'm not even going to pretend to figure out what Reva's motivations are because I'm fairly certain the people who created her character had no idea what in the hell they were doing. She was more or less just tossed into the script and everyone just hoped for the best. Still, her colossal oversight and lack of basic reasoning has resulted in Obi-Wan being able to rejoin with the rest of the rebellion. Proto-Rey is then able to bypass the compressor, overriding the hangar bay doors and ensuring their escape off-world. I really think we should revisit something that I brought up earlier. So the safety of all these refugees and the entire Proto-Rebel alliance rests in the hands of a child who has zero experience with electrical engineering or any basic knowledge of this facility. And had she not been able to override the controls, everyone in this room would end up getting mercilessly slaughtered.
Man, this is some bullshit!
It's not clever writing to resolve the conflict established in the plot by force-hammering inconceivable levels of contrivance and luck into the script. It's just plain lazy. People are fatigued with this style of character design, and it has permeated practically every single title and franchise Disney touches. Vader then arrives at the Proto-Rebel base to discover that once more, Reva has massively dropped the ball. Not that he should really be all that surprised at this rate. I was half expecting him to give her a medal during my first watch-through. But as a last-ditch effort, he storms into the hangar bay to prevent the survivors from taking off.
You serious?
I cannot believe that these people who've made what is the TV equivalent to cancer are so void of any imagination that they are quite literally having to directly rip off scenes from the sequels. My god, what a new fucking low we've stooped to. So first off, and this should be fairly straightforward, there was no second ship in the shot whenever Vader was force pulling the other one down. It's not just that there shouldn't have been a decoy, there quite literally couldn't have been one. We're at such peak levels of stupidity that I'm left wondering if Deborah Chow didn't direct this show blindfolded. Secondly, Vader shouldn't be capable of force-pulling an entire ship. He never did it on Hoth, and he never stopped the Tantive 4 from taking off during Rogue One. This change radically jumbles our initial understanding of what Vader's limitations with the Force are, and utterly undermines certain scenes within the OT.
You don't care about canon? Come on, don't be disingenuous. When canon turns into, like, laws on what you can and can't do in your movie, in your story, especially when it's visual or based off of some piece of equipment or something that we've never seen in the franchise before, when it turns into strict adherence to laws, well then shit, I think some people have lost the heartbeat of Star Wars.
That's right, Hello Greedo, a Star Wars branded YouTube channel, thinks it's disingenuous for lifelong fans of Star Wars to care about canon and the laws of its established universe. Because that's definitely something normal fans go around saying, right? If anything, it sounds like what a typical Disney Lucasfilm YouTuber show would say. But I digress. Reva then decides now is the perfect opportunity to enact her revenge against Vader, only for it to fail in spectacular fashion. There seems to be a recurring theme with her character, and I don't think it's the one that the writers were really gunning for. Or who knows, maybe it is. We can't rule anything out anymore, unfortunately.
Hello, third sister. Revenge does wonders for the will to live, don't you think?
There is only so much cataclysmic levels of incompetence the human brain can take in all at once. It's a bit surreal, actually, how much this show has whittled the concept of death down to a running gag. Qui-Gon didn't need to learn the secrets of immortality, he just needed to be angrier.
See, now that's some bullshit.
I'm kind of left wondering why anyone would even bother with the decision to become a Jedi at all, when being Sith apparently makes you completely invincible against motherfucking lightsaber strikes. It sure is a shame that no one ever told Trilla that.
Avengers!
Then again, Reva was also stabbed in the chest as a youngling, and even her dumbass managed to survive, so I guess the people on the verge of death need to just want to live more. Also, I don't know about you, but the Grand Inquisitor looks pretty dead as shit in this shot. It seems we're at a point in Star Wars where the only way someone can die is if they look directly into the camera and tell the audience that they're dying. It's either that or straight up decapitation. I wonder if aNaKiN will learn from the mistake he made last time.
Goodbye, Grand Inquisitor.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
I really should have expected nothing less, but good God if I haven't been body slammed by Disney's brilliant creative vision of turning the Empire into a faction of window-licking morons. However, we should also definitely touch on Reva getting stabbed during Order 66 because that plot point is equally as stupid. So, barring the fact that Reva miraculously didn't bleed out on the Jedi Temple floor, she decides the best moral path to take for avenging those she's lost is to become a Sith Inquisitor, where she will be forced to carry out Vader's orders to go wipe out even more innocent Jedi and kidnap Force-sensitive children to be tortured.
Not a great plan.
Sometimes the ends justify the means, but if the means consists of slaughtering off countless people who belong to the same order those she's trying to avenge were part of, then Reva is in no position to hold Vader morally accountable because she's guilty of doing the exact same thing. And that's just under the assumption that she wasn't brought into the Inquisition until much later, because if she had been indoctrinated right after the events of Order 66, then there's no way in hell this interaction should even be happening. Oh, and before I forget, we get a real gem of a line from Grand Egghead himself.
Your rage was useful.
We're presented with another plot twist in this episode that once again falls entirely flat in its execution. Not due to its predictability, but because the concept itself cannot exist with everything else that's taken place in the show. Apparently, the sole reason for why Reva was made an Inquisitor was so that they could use her personal hatred for Obi-Wan as a means of tracking him down. That, however, can't be the case due to the Grand Inquisitor actively going out of his way to prevent her from achieving what is supposed to be his and Vader's ulterior motive.
You will forget this fixation with Kenobi, or I will relieve you of your duties. Is that clear?
If capturing Obi-Wan was truly a top priority, then why would the Grand Inquisitor specifically order her repeatedly to not pursue him? A majority, if not all of these characters' actions are entirely disconnected from their actions, which results in a scene with no clearly defined stakes, leaving nothing for the viewer to grab onto in terms of actual substance. But of course, the fun doesn't stop there. Because Bale is the type of person you wouldn't even trust to share the details of a surprise party with, he decides to call up Obi-Wan.
Tatooine. Owen, help the boy.
It would seem this is enough information to incentivize Reva to travel to Tatooine and hunt down Luke. Now, you're probably asking yourself, why in the absolute hell would she want to do that? Which is a very good question. Oh no, I don't have anything. I legitimately don't know. I'm not even sure if any of the writers know. You'd think Reva's top priority would be enacting her revenge against Vader and the Inquisitors, and based on what's depicted on screen, there's nothing to indicate that Reva knows that Luke is Anakin's son. Even then, what would killing Luke accomplish? Hey, I just murdered your son you didn't even know existed? Might kill your daughter too, lols?
I'm looking for a farmer. Name's Owen.
Upon discovering that Reva is on Tatooine searching for Owen, Beru shows him her secret stash.
I'm not putting anyone else in danger, Owen. We're enough. You and me.
Give me 1 second, I'm still trying to process that not even minor side characters like Uncle Owen or Aunt Beru are safe from all the grade A level fuckery in this script. Now I don't know about you, but Owen and Beru never struck me as the fighting type. There's actually a lot of evidence to suggest that, since they sort of die because they aren't the fighting type. At the hands of Stormtroopers, no less. But all of this is amped up even further by the prospect of having them take on a Sith Inquisitor. As far as they're concerned/aware, the worst case scenario has turned out to be true. The Empire has learned of Luke's identity, which means they will show up in full force to detain him, and Obi-Wan is nowhere to be found because he has neglected his responsibility with protecting Luke. There's a pretty strong case to be made that staying at the farmstead is suicide, but Owen ends up going along with her decision like the absolute zombie that he is. Meanwhile, we're shown yet another TLJ-style chase scene. The transport shuttle's hyperdrive is down, and Vader's Star Destroyer is following in close pursuit. Not that being able to jump to another system really matters at this point. The sequels made damn sure of that by establishing that ships can be tracked through hyperspace. Unless they plan on doing some light-skipping bullshit, which doesn't seem all that safe with a transport full of refugees, then being able to outmaneuver the Star Destroyer is physically impossible. In an act of desperation, however, Obi-Wan decides to serve as a distraction to lure the Empire away so that the proto-rebels can escape. But before leaving, he entrusts the Jedi impersonator who's conned countless people out of their money, and is also the reason for why Luke's safety is compromised, with getting Leia home. Let's remember too that she's not just any child, Leia is Alderaan royalty, and realistically a traitor to the Empire with a substantial bounty for her capture. Now, given that Hodge is in the situation he's in more so because of his stupid business decisions rather than any meaningful moral conviction, putting Leia in his care is colossally irresponsible of Obi-Wan. There's no reason to believe that Roken wouldn't be willing to return her back to Alderaan, especially since the Proto-Rebels went out of their way to help Obi-Wan break her out. Shortly following Obi-Wan's departure, instead of Vader doing the sensible thing and deploying a squadron of TIE fighters to pursue the Proto-Rebels, while simultaneously getting in his ship to pursue Kenobi, he decides to divert the entire Star Destroyer to follow Obi-Wan's escape pod, ensuring the refugees' safe escape. The Proto-Rebel Alliance lives to fight another day, and it's all thanks to Vader's sheer stupidity.
What a load of bullshit.
We then get another 1v1 duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan.
Did you truly think that you could defeat me?
God, I wish we'd gotten that ending. Instead, we're subjected to one that's far, far worse.
I am not your failure,
Obi-Wan.
You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker. I did.
In this moment, Obi-Wan is effectively being told that any threat of Anakin that once remained has been consumed entirely by Darth Vader. And as he acknowledges that his friend is truly dead, he chooses to walk away, sparing the most evil man in the entire galaxy to continue to carry out atrocities under the Empire, resulting in the death of billions. Because had Obi-Wan operated within his character, Vader would have never been able to connect Leia back to the Rebels during A New Hope, and Alderaan would have never been targeted by the Death Star. The blood of countless innocents is on Obi-Wan's hands, and it's all because he didn't do what he must.
Fool this man!
I intend on paying this walking corpse of a franchise no further mind, because this video has shown us what we already knew from the very beginning. Star Wars is dead and needs to be properly laid to rest. I could go into further detail about why Reva's arc in this show is so horribly designed, but I will only give these new characters the same amount of time and respect that Disney Lucasfilm holds for this universe.
We're constantly thinking about, okay, what does this really mean inside the long saga and mythology that George Lucas created? So it could go on forever. To be perfectly honest, if we have good storytellers, it will go on forever.
Shut the fuck up. No one cares about your robot fan fiction. Know your fucking place, trash.